We'll call the 22nd of October meeting of the Manhattan City Commission to order. If you all rise, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, this is a great occasion for us. I don't know how many of you out there are aficionados of the zoo. Most of us love the zoo. I was just telling Chris beforehand that whenever I go to another city, and I go to a lot of them, one of the things I always do, whether it's for relaxation or whatever it is, I go to the zoo. So I've been to most of the largest zoos in the U.S. and some overseas, and we've got a great zoo here, particularly for the size of our community. So Scott and his team and all of the groups that support the zoo have just done a marvelous job. And as you know, we've got some great plans for the zoo going forward. It's going to take us a while to get there, and real dedicated support's needed over time to do it. But once you've got the plan on the board, it's far easier to get to where you think you're going to go. And Chris is here, Chris Veers, and she does the accreditation for these zoos. She was telling me earlier that we've got about, I think, 229 zoos that are accredited, and that's about 10% of the total that are licensed to operate as zoos. So we're in great company, and we're very proud of our zoo. Would you like to talk next, Chris, or?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor Dodson and commissioners. I am proud to be here on behalf of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums to talk about the Sunset Zoo and its recent achievement of accreditation. The Sunset Zoo is a part of the AZA community of 239 accredited zoos and aquariums. We actually have members in 12 countries in the US, Canada, Mexico, Argentina, Bahamas, Bermuda, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Spain. So a diverse group of zoos and aquariums of varied sizes in acreage, the number of animals in the collections, and varied budgets. So what binds all of these 239 together is that each and every one of them meets the exact same standards, whether you're a small zoo like the Sunset Zoo or one of the larger zoos like the San Diego Zoo. These are the highest standards of accreditation for zoos in the world. So that in and of itself, that achievement deserves a very high congratulations. It is a team effort, as the mayor suggested, and its achievement of, whoops, this is gonna be difficult. It's the achievement of a major milestone. It's the measure of a performance of an organization or an institution, and it says that that zoo, the Sunset Zoo, is meeting the best practices of a profession. AZA accreditation is tough. It's unbiased. It starts with a lengthy evaluation, a self-evaluation first, an on-site inspection, and a peer review. Our standards evolve. The Sunset Zoo has actually been accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums 7 times. Just because they were accredited 10 years ago or even 5 years ago does not mean they will be accredited again, because our standards are tough and they do change. as we learn more about the needs of the animals in our care. How tough? Well, we don't accredit all members or all potential members. We have denied 26 members in a 10-year period. We do expect our members, yes, to meet the standards the days we go inspect. We call that the snapshot in time. But accreditation, I like to say that that's 365 days a year, 24/7. It is, as the mayor said, what differentiates AZA zoos and aquariums from the other 2,800 licensed exhibitors in the United States. And what does it signify? It signifies excellence in animal care, conservation, and education. And it involves, I'm going to give you this. So sorry. We look at all things, kind of soup to nuts. We're looking at animal care, including the living environments, veterinary programs, including preventative medicine, financial stability, risk management, conservation education programs. We want to make sure that we have solid programs so that we are teaching and inspiring our public to help us save wildlife and wild places. Conservation efforts. Your Sunset Zoo is very involved in a number of conservation efforts, and I would say is exemplary for a zoo of its size. Puerto Rican crested toads. Many of you have probably never even heard of them, but you have heard of your ornate box turtle, which your Sunset Zoo is also involved with, and also a very worthwhile project in India, saving bears. Our accreditation also looks at safety, really important. Safety for the visitors, for the staff, and also for the animals. And speaking of staff, we want to make sure, are there sufficient staff, and are they well trained? Governing authority, we want to make sure that the roles and responsibilities are clear. We like to make sure that the director and his or her staff are making the decisions on animals and programs. And obviously, guest services. So accreditation, again, is not a slam dunk. It's something that you all should be very proud of, the fact that you have an accredited zoo. I like to think that a zoo is the reflection of the community, and I would hope that your community is proud of the fact that you do have an accredited zoo within your community. It is a big deal. Scott likes to take all the credit. He doesn't deserve very much of it. Sorry, my friend. No, actually, it took a whole team. It took his staff team. It takes the Friends of the Sunset Zoo, the Sunset Zoological Park and Wildlife Conservation Trust, the support of this commission and the citizens, and basically it takes the will and commitment that you all want to have a modern 21st century zoo. And I'm here to tell you, you do. And with that, I'd like to present Scott with this plaque of accreditation and say my heartiest congratulations.
Thank you, Chris. She basically said everything that I was going to say. I just want to make sure that the people who helped this happen understand and appreciate how much we appreciate their support. Obviously, our staff, who works really hard every day to take care of these animals and to do the best they can by them. Our friends at Sunset Zoo and our Zoo Trust both provide support to us. The City Commission, without your support, this would not be possible. And of course, the community itself. Without the community coming out and visiting us day in and day out and supporting us, we could not be an accredited zoo. I want to thank you all. It's a high honor, and we're very proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I think everybody knows, this is a work session. So the first item up is digital off-premise advertising signs and changes in the UDO.
For not having that done at the time. Yep, broke it, but it's working. Okay, thank you for your patience. Again, my name's Chad Bunger, Assistant Director with Community Development. And we were approached recently by the folks at Thomas Outdoor Advertising asking if the community would be willing to reconsider the current regulations and change them to allow for electronic off-premise advertising signs. You may recall we redid our ordinance, our sign regulations in response to some needed touch-ups due to some Supreme Court cases and just the fact that they were fairly old. And at that time, or then and still today, we allow electronic or digital signs in certain districts and for certain uses. Primarily, commercial districts are allowed to have up to 32 square foot signs in a digital fashion. And then institutional uses like churches and schools could apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a very limited electronic changeable copy sign, which I have some photos and describe them. Off-premise signs, the large kind of billboards that we're all familiar with, we're specifically not allowed to have these kind of signs stating safety and community character at that time. So they were not allowed to use electronics to display their messages. The type of digital signs we allow from left to right, electronic changeable copy are really statics or words on a solid background with a minute changeover rate. A digital graphic sign is, as you see there, something with images. It also has a minute changeover rate, and both of those have to be instantaneous change from one message to another. So no fly-ins or spins or anything fancy that I could do with my PowerPoint presentation. It really has to be instantaneous. We have several of these around the community. And then the digital animated sign, we restricted to just in Aggieville for specific events that close down Morrow or the side streets. And this would need a conditional use through the Board of Zoning Appeals. I do not believe we have any approved to operate in that fashion, although the one or two digital signs or electronic signs in the district, I would imagine have that functionality to kind of come standard, is my understanding. They're just not operated that way and haven't gone through the process to allow that to operate. Kind of going again through some background, in 2016 we amended the zoning regulations specifically for off-premise signs to allow Tri-Vision signs. We had an incident out by the airport or the Eureka Valley Industrial Park where we ultimately amended the sign regulations to allow signs that basically have multi-sided panels that switch the signs. They're still really a static sign. It's a fairly antiquated technology when you compare it to the electronic or digital signs. But even then, we did not allow electronic or digital signs. Fast forwarding to today, we were asked, would we reconsider? And so before staff put a bunch of time into drafting regulations and getting into the weeds on that, we wanted to bring it to the planning board, which we did 2 weeks ago, and to you all to really ask the big question, should we allow them? The Federal Highway Administration has conducted their safety study saying that there was no significant relationship to the presence of these digital signs to crash incidents on highways. Although, I think I included it in the packet, there have been some academic studies that refute some of those findings. So it's not a clear-cut slam dunk that they may or may not impact traffic crashes, but I guess one of the reasons why we're considering it is, or we're asked to consider it, is because of the Federal Highway Administration's findings that there were no safety issues involved. So if you're five want to answer this question real quick, we can make this a very short presentation, or I can continue on, and we have a series of questions of just different ways we can regulate these signs throughout the community. Do want to remind off-premise signs through court cases and other things, we have the ability to regulate them more strict than our typical sign regulations. As long as we're able to pull it back to a community goal of some sort, so safety, character, community character, those kind of things. So for instance, today we allow them only on major highways, we have separation distances, we limit size, those kind of things. So I presume you don't want to just jump in and say yes, no, so I'm going to continue going.
Can I ask one
Yes, sir.
question? I read all that traffic information, but what came to mind was we've had digital signs sitting there at the KSU parking garage for a long period of time, and is there any evidence that we've had more accidents there now because of it? And I don't know of any.
I'll be truthful. This whole question is not a hot priority for us. I'm sure it is for Thomas Outdoor Advertising, but it's not a top priority for us. So we really haven't done a whole lot of research on the safety side or a great deal of research on the regulation side. So it's something we can look at. I mean, there's that one. We have those signs in a variety of other places in the community that we can kind of compare and contrast, but we haven't done that kind of research yet.
Yeah, I would think we might want to do that before we go too much further.
Sure.
You know, but just figure out if RCPD is seeing an increase because of that. My gut feeling is no. Just right, same thing the federal government said.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, just from being on the law board and seeing the statistics and seeing where most of the accidents occur, that isn't one of them.
Probably not. Yeah.
When did the Federal Highway Administration change or make a ruling that was it dramatically different, or has it evolved?
When we were going through the sign regulation updates in 2014-15,
Right.
they had not concluded their study, so it was a large unknown. I believe that report was done, and obviously after that, 16 or 17, basically concluded that there was no significant change.
So are we, sorry, Chad,
No, quite all right.
are we discussing this because of Thomas Outdoor Advertising, or because we had, as commissioners, requested to hear this?
Because Thomas Outdoor Advertising asked us to consider it. So.
Okay, because I don't remember agreeing or saying we needed to have a work session on it.
Yeah, they have more power than I do.
So I'm not sure
I've
how
been
that
trying to get
happened,
rental
because this
registration,
isn't
rental
my
inspection conversation
major
for
priorities
some
to
time now.
discuss that.
And that's fine. I can back up a slide and say we don't want to really just consider it at this point, and I'll go home and have supper. So,
Let's go through that.
all right, we'll go through it. So some questions that need direction ultimately is where should we allow these outdoor advertising signs, or off-premise outdoor advertising signs, excuse me. You can see here currently where we do allow them. We also need to consider what type. I think the consensus amongst staff when we briefly discussed this was we really should just allow digital graphic signs. And if you recall, it's this center type. So allowing a full color image, but also not allowing slide-ins or whiz-bangs or anything like that. Just an image and the image replaces. Also need to consider the dwell time. Currently, our electronic signs have a minute dwell time. There are some discussions that those should be tailored more to the sight distance and traffic speeds as you try to time it with how quickly the traffic goes by that sign. Obviously, that is a significant business element to the sign operator and owner. The quicker dwell time you get, the faster or the more messages you can put up, the more business you can generate through that sign. So I did a quick calculation. Probably on Fort Riley, Tuttle Creek Boulevard, and Seth Child, if you assumed a fairly long sight distance of 500 plus feet and the traffic speeds there, we're looking at 8 to 10 second dwell times. So you would get anywhere from 6 to 7 or 8 messages in a minute. But the idea is that the traffic is well gone before anybody sees that new message, is the idea. Also dimensions, sizes of these signs, setbacks, height, those sort of things. Staff's kind of general look at it was probably not a reason to change anything greatly from what we have now. These are all the current standards, but we can certainly adjust. And then separation. We have today an off-premise sign has to be separated from another off-premise sign by at least 800 feet radial distance, and then also 200 feet from any residential district. So we can keep that, or if we wanted to expand that for a digital sign, there's a variety of avenues we can go there. This is probably the biggest consideration. There are many cities that are going through this transformation that are requiring sign swaps. So in essence, if I'm a sign owner that wants to put up a new digital sign or convert one of my existing billboards to a digital sign, then before I can get that permit for the new digital sign, I have to agree to and or remove a number of certain size of square footage of signage or number of signs, so that we keep that proliferation of outdoor advertising or billboard sites down. Also, I think there could be the case that if I have a very expensive digital sign that can rotate messages over 6 every minute, that's good money, and I'm going to pay a lot of attention to that really good sign and maybe not so much attention to this static sign that only changes once every month, once every 6 months to a year. And so there could be an argument made that by not sign swapping out, that those existing static signs could, under the wrong business person's hands, go into disarray and become an eyesore. So
That concept makes sense for me with a company that currently does signage, but what prevents let's say one large company says, I agree to that and we're going to take away these signs. What prevents another organization from coming in and just putting signs there?
it's really tough, truthfully, but also our provision of sign separation. Truthfully, one company has the vast majority of billboards, outdoor or off-site advertising signs in Manhattan.
True.
Like 95% worth.
If regulation was put into place, so it makes it seem like 40-ish% or 50-ish% of the prime locations that they currently have would no longer be useful for them, but maybe they would be useful for somebody else.
Sure. Yeah, it is certainly a barrier for new arrivals to the market, for sure. Yep. So some communities have done, as I said, if you're going to put up X square foot, you need to take down so many times, multiplier effect of existing signs away, or one to several actual signs. I've seen some communities that have made the requirement that you must take down X number of grandfathered or non-conforming signs. We have several in the community in downtown in Aggieville that are non-conforming to that district. It's, we've evolved, one could say, and where a billboard may not be appropriate in an urban scale, pedestrian-oriented community or area. And so maybe there's a mechanism there that we could meet some of those goals and needs. So that's really all I have. Really just want some direction, some guidance from the commission. We did the exact same presentation to the planning board. They wanted more information about safety. One board member provided a number of those academic resources that I gave you, and then they weren't adamantly opposed to it. They just wanted more information on the safety factor. So I'd be very excited to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I get, at this point, maybe public comment would be good.
Very
and
good.
we'll come back to you,
Yep.
Chad. So at this point, would anyone like to come up from the public and comment on this issue?
I'm Leighton Thomas from Thomas Outdoor Advertising, and just this, we've been going to some different conventions, kind of seeing the landscape of basically from the consumer's point of view of where the industry is going, and has kind of already, we're a little bit lagging behind in that aspect. Especially from a consumer standpoint. We get requests to have this kind of technology to be able to present things that they want. It's more of a instantaneous culture now, and so this allows that to be done. Chad did a good job going over just kind of hitting some of the high points of what the technology can do. You guys probably already read through the packet that we presented to you a while ago. Mrs. Reddy, in terms of how to go about this, we asked several different questions, several different times of how to appropriately go through the channels of trying to upgrade our technology to meet consumer demand. And this kind of lands us here, to answer that question there. But just kind of, he did a good job of talking about the sign swap. What we had presented to staff is even like a 2-to-1 of, and to answer your question a little bit more, most of the inventory that is in town, not all of it, but it is grandfathered. So if we take it down to be able to acquire that, it's not like somebody else can come put it back up. So it's not like you're gonna create more clutter just because we took it down. Somebody else is gonna go back in. That's not gonna happen. To answer that question a little bit more clearly to you, because that falls under so many different Beautification Act, state, most of the byways, but the safety aspect, there was one to kind of counteract some of those academic studies that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration revisited their old study, conducted a new study, and it still came back with a fixation on a digital billboard of 1.34 seconds, which the average for safety concerns, according to them, is 2.0. So it's still well below, I mean, it's not quite double, but it's well below the national guidelines for a safety aspect. Plus, if you really wanted to, you could go out there, visit out just east of town at the Green Valley intersection and Highway 24, which sees almost 30,000 cars daily, that billboard there. And I drive that every morning. I'm not seeing complications from it at that intersection. I don't have those figures, but I can definitely obtain those for you. Some of the positives, do we all know a lot of the positives that we can do with that sign? I mean, one of the biggest things is the engagement of the community. When I say the committee, the law enforcement can, so if you have an Amber Alert, it's not like you have to contact me to put up a message. We suspend all advertisement, and that is put through that message, so it'll pop up, you know, little boy missing, or elderly citizen, or let's say weather alert in April of this year, down in Bentonville, Arkansas. They displayed a tornado warning as it was announced, and it displayed that until the threat was lifted, and it suspended all ads. That's one thing with our customers. They know with this technology that it's going to be able to bounce in and out. The public service announcements, the PSAs, is that for me to be done?
Yeah,
Okay,
you have 30
sorry.
30 seconds now.
Okay, well, just it is a very new, strong form. It allows local businesses to be able to tailor their marketing strategies for smaller, more flexible marketing strategies. So if you have any other questions, I'd gladly answer them.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Thomas? All right, thanks very much. Anyone else, please? Another Mr. Thomas.
Yes, I'm just the older model. Just to sum up a little bit of what my son had spoke about on this, we as Thomas Outdoor, we see this as our company giving back to Manhattan in a lot of ways. We will have one whole slot that we want to call the community slot, which we'll be able to put up events that are coming up at McCain, at Seco Park, and just promotion of different activities in Manhattan. So we think that'd be very, very beneficial. Getting to the questions here on the permit process, we talked to Chad and the city on this, and it's, you know, we're still working it out, but we even looked at, rather than the 800 feet, a mile and a half separate.
2.5 miles.
2.5 miles. So you would have a very great separation on those, which would limit you down to, we figured out the possibility of 2, maybe 3 signs. The other part to this, we don't mind, and how all this came about was through our information, through the different associations, and when we saw that other cities were the tear down ratio 2 or 3 to 1, where we're willing to do that too, and take down a few of the signs, say on Fort Riley Boulevard, to gain one of these. Well, we just saw a heck of a lot of benefits to the community in the ways of law enforcement and I guess promotion of events, the Amber Alert and that type of thing. So I guess the main factor, like you had mentioned, Jared, on another company coming in and that kind of thing, we didn't want, and that's where crafting the permit process would virtually eliminate it. If you put together what avenues you need to have to enact one of these signs and you put enough details on it, then that kind of wipes out the other possibilities of a proliferation of a bunch of them coming out. So, anyway, any questions?
Questions for Bart?
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else, please? Okay, back to the commission. Any thoughts?
I was gonna clarify, why is it on the agenda? I think, it was June, I think, that we got some packets from Thomas Signs, and I talked with the city manager, he asked me if it should go on the agenda, and I told him yes, so I assumed he did that with everyone else. But I just want to clarify that, so, at least I said, fine, let's discuss it, and I was a little bit hesitant because we spent a long time on that sign regulation when John Mata was up here. That was his big project, and I didn't want to see a sweeping change to that's for sure. But I've gotten 2 or 3 emails, people against it, but primarily I think it may be because there's some vision that we're going to turn the city into Las Vegas by putting too many of these there, and the details of this actually prevent that. And so, I don't see that as a concern. The safety thing, again, as I read it and I look at, we haven't had accidents where we do have signs, so I'm sure that may be overplayed. I think these things are more of a safety concern from what I've seen in town. So I'm not concerned about that. I also think that, if we don't like signs, the provision in here where if you put up one electric sign, another one goes away, it seems like we would reduce the number of billboards, so that seems to be a plus. And so I'm open to, looking at the details here. This 2.5 miles between them may be too much of a distance when I think about it, but because it may have to do with the roads. And clearly, a couple people that sent me emails say we don't want the town to turn into that little stretch of I-70 over there by Junction City. And yes, absolutely not. The regulations have to prevent that. But I like the concept that, you can do public safety messages on here, and the mechanism for that, putting that out there, I think is a huge plus that can't be done right now. And I think, banning the animated part is very good. We should just have the digital messaging. And I think as part of the data I read, this could actually be a plus for some of the local businesses because it'll make them a little bit more competitive in advertising, and they've got to deal with the internet and things of that nature. And I think the speed with which you can change the message that's up there because it's digital would be a real plus for anybody in the business community. So I think the thing sounds to me like it's business friendly also. So I see a lot of positives here. I think the negatives, I'm not sure I buy into them based on the data that's out here. We're not going to turn it into Las Vegas, and I don't think the data is going to show that it's a real safety problem. So I'm open to nailing down some details and bringing this back.
So first, thank you for the information you provided us. It was probably a few weeks ago. I read through that, and so when I started thinking about this, I tried to lay out next the negatives and the positives. And I'll be honest, going through your requests and some of the information that you found for us, and even what I'm seeing right here in my packet, there are some things that I disagree with. So first, just on safety, because I don't have any further information, my default is going to be to trust the federal government study. I have no other information to prove that wrong at this moment, and so safety isn't as big of a concern as character is for me. And one thing that I couldn't find, and before I would feel comfortable saying really honestly yes or no, is I guess I've been to communities where there are a lot of digital signs, and it does seem overwhelming, but comparatively to a traditional sign at night, just being able to see a picture of those like side by side, and what when we talk about the difference in character, like what is the actual difference in terms of like brightness, and how it appears, that's something like when I was doing my research I really couldn't find, because I'll tell you, character is my main concern, because all of the other points seem quite neutral to me. The public safety aspect, I work for a company that makes the software that makes that happen, right? You're doing it through iPause, and if they were to send out a message that overtook the billboards, it also sent an alert to everybody's phone automatically, and it's also taken over the radio stations. Like, there's a lot of other mechanisms that are in play there. And so to me, that's kind of a neutral. It's not a net positive necessarily for me. There was some environmental impacts that were noted in this, and I did a little bit of research, and I found that there has been some studies done on this, and it was actually found that digital billboards have a bigger carbon footprint if they're not powered by solar panels. Particularly, they use about 30 times more energy than the average American home does in a year. So again, it's not really a positive there. So to me, it all comes down to the character through the permitting process that you're open to and the swap signs. I think that we could solve some of those issues. So I'm interested in hearing more, but I would like to see if I could, I don't know if anybody has an idea other than Jared, just go drive around more, to see what they really look like, especially at night, like side by side, or a picture of that, because I think that's where people are the most concerned on their impact. So I'm open to hearing more, but if I had to vote on it tonight, I would say no. But there is an openness with some new information that I'd be willing to hear more.
Yeah, I remember when John Mata was here too. This took him many years as far as signage when we were discussing it, and I remember having that conversation when Commissioner McCullough was here too. And we decided on the regulations that we have today because of some of the safety studies that had been out there at that time, but also about aesthetics. There's a church on Scenic Drive, and they have illuminated sign. And when John Mata was on here, I don't think he appreciated that one because that was done by the county, and we don't allow those in the city. And the ones that had the illuminated signs were mostly, I think, gas stations, banks, and the alumni, the K-State garage, and a couple of other ones. We did talk about brightness quite a bit, and also in the neighborhoods as far as into their windows, while they're sleeping. And there's one on, I think it's Hayes, and I don't know if it's Chick-fil-A or which one that is. It's extremely bright. Their signage is very bright, and I don't know if it falls within our guidelines or not. But during that discussion, we did not want a Las Vegas type city. We kind of enjoyed the character of our community the way it is right now, and I think that's what we preferred. And it's only been, I think, 2 or 3 years ago that we decided those regulations. And I'm willing to stick with those regulations even as we move forward. I understand that there's a lot of discussion as far as being competitive in the signage area. But I think with what we have right now, we are more conducive to having people change those billboards as they choose. I understand it's not going to take as often as possible, but I worry about kids these days when they have these phones in front of them and there's constantly changing signage in front of them as well. So that bothers me because we are a university town, and even though we don't have data saying, well, that's what causes the accident, it certainly is a distraction. And one thing we do know that is it's inattentive behavior that causes accidents in our community. So the fewer distractions we have, the better it is, especially being a university town. So right now I'm kind of comfortable with what we have in our community. I don't mind having a longer discussion on it, and I'm comfortable because we just decided this just a few years ago. It wasn't even 5 or 10 years ago. It was just like 2 or 3 years ago. So I want us to at least wait a little bit longer before we go further down this road. I didn't realize I don't remember saying let's have a work session on this, but there must have been 3 commissioners that did say that, because I felt we just changed these regulations not too long ago, and that took a long time for us to even have that discussion. So if the commissioners want to have further discussion, I will participate in that, but currently I think what we have works very well for us in our community.
I think we're also close to Fort Riley, and I grew up in Topeka with Topeka Boulevard en route to Forbes Air Force Base, and there were a lot of glitzy signs on there, so I tend to err on the side of not wanting to go with digital signs. I remember back, I think it might have been on the planning board, I'm not sure, back when this was discussed earlier, but I remember there being a really bright sign out by the airport, and it was a car dealership, and it had a flashing and crawl, and it seemed to me when I would drive by there, I tried not to look at it, and it just compelled my attention. And that bothered me, because I thought, now if I can't control my attention, so every time I go by I'd practice. But I like the calming nature of our community and the signs that we have, and I don't want to go back to the kinds of bright, attention-grabbing. I remember, and this is not what we're going for, but those signs that were on a trailer with the big arrow and that blinked to get you to go into a commercial business. I am strongly opposed to digital in residential areas. And I think as long as, some of the churches have implemented them, and I think those have been reasonably, they're not intense, and they're just informative. But for a while, I began to think that every church in town was going to get one, but they've been kind of slow lately. That's kind of slowed down. I think there was something else. I tend to think about these signs out in the county and not in the city. So if we allow them in these current places, C5, C6, light manufacturing, and I3 and 4, I see them, they're on McCall Road mostly. And like Yusha's reference to one on Tuttle Creek, there are one or two on McCall Road that I have called the code office on, because it is so bright that I have trouble really just seeing past it. And what I've discovered over time is the difficulty that the city has enforcing just the few that we have that are onerous. And they call the company, and the company turns it down, and then, from my understanding, the next time they change that sign, that brightness comes back in full force, and it has to be toned down again. That was the explanation from the code office last time. So it's difficult, it's not easy to enforce, and you're really talking, I tend to think of pixels, but I think there's another, nits, I think is the name of it, for signs. It's hard to enforce that brightness. So I'm pretty happy with those things we have now. I certainly would listen to and consider, some other examples. I'd even go drive to find them. But just for now, anyway, I'm pretty satisfied with our existing sign ordinance.
Yeah, I think many places I've been, I can remember when on I-95 that kind of goes down the East Coast, down below Savannah, there were so many signs. I mean, as you went towards Florida, there were these giant billboards, and those were used to be along Highway 17, and then when 95 opened up, all those, then the big billboards with the big pedestals came, all the modern ones. So it looked all the world like it does now on I-70 out there just as you pass Fort Riley. And that's just awful. Nobody wants that. I think you know, as we look into the future here, all of the technology continues to change like Jared described. And I mean, at some point, we'll probably be challenged to deal with holograms that'll be projected in space, you know. I mean, this is just things you have to think about for the future. And I think there are some, I mean, one of the things that was written in here too is the projection of light. A lot of those signs do show up a long way away and you can't even see what the words say. And so on these digital signs, like the one on out by Eureka, as you drive, take the turn around to go to the airport on the inner loop, you can see the kind of the impact of that digital sign. I know the church sign is bright, but I mean, the combination of pixelation, the turnover of the advertising, let's say every 2 minutes, the distraction index by what you put on there. In other words, you don't have things that move. You put messages on there and then the message changes. Those things I think we can probably deal with. One of the things that I find attractive about this, quite frankly, is the ability to put up PSAs or missing persons or things like that. And I remember when we were in here, was it 2 weeks ago when we had the tornado warning? So, you know, we could see when we went out here, we could see cars just driving up and down points like there was nothing going on. Now, I don't know to what extent those signs help, but I mean, it's either that they don't have their radio on or, you know, they're listening to a Cirrus radio or something. So, yeah, or on their phone. But those kind of things are somewhat attractive. In other words, they do have a public service function. And I know this from what I've seen, most of the accidents, quite frankly, are around our roundabouts, not and in the top end of Aggieville, not around these signs. So I think what you've heard here, Chad, if anybody has a different idea here, it probably needs a lot more study, particularly on that safety stuff, because we need to know I think one of the things we need to know is the refresh rate versus the incidence of accident. So, you know, when you look at all those studies, and particularly that one that was in Israel, I mean, I think that's kind of instructive, but we've got to know if there's a true distraction that is over and above what you might find internally, inside the car, that is, that would be helpful. And then brightness control, the sign replacement. So I think they said 1 to 3. In other words, you take out 3, put in 1.
Could we answer a few questions?
Well, no, you can't do that, unfortunately, so.
Okay. 2 to 1.
So 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, you guys have to come back with some kind of suggestion, and then maybe it's helpful to see where those might be.
Well, and right now,
You can't, Bart, you can't do that in here. And then, what was the other one? There was another element in here.
Can I, when you, two things in particular for that I would like to see. First, could you verify, because I've actually asked this several times and never been told, is the county actually certified to use iPods? Because all of this public safety stuff does not even matter if the county can't use iPods, because that's the only way that they can overtake those systems. They do? Okay, cool. So that's good to know. And then second, and I feel like it's been insinuated, but whatever the term is, wattage or brightness, whatever that is, compared to just what a traditional billboard puts out currently, being able to see that, because obviously things like light pollution, or most of the emails that I got from people were, that was more of a concern from them, as they felt like those billboards put off more light pollution than traditional ones. So if that's not the case, if we could lay it out in a way when we actually vote on it, I think that would help the public a lot too.
Yeah, because I think, when I looked through this proposal, it talked about internal lighting rather than having floodlights shining up, and I think that makes a huge difference. you know, from how much that's there, and, you know, and I agree with the brightness thing, but I think our regulation already had that. And I wouldn't try to do a whole lot of changing to our sign regulation. As I looked at what was proposed, it's just 4 or 5 very small tweaks. And that's why I wasn't concerned, because I felt like if we actually implemented this close to what was proposed, we would end up with less billboards, and we'd end up with the advantage of the public safety, you know, feature there. And I think the brightness and the distraction with the internal lighting, it seems to work better. So I don't expect the staff to, you know, charge in and try to rewrite a whole bunch of things. Just basically, there were 4 or 5 points in that proposal. You know, the internal lighting, the 2-for-1 swap out, the idea of, you know, limited number of these in place. They had a 2.5 mile distance between them, which I thought might be excessive. And then, of course, limiting the zoning on where it can go. Because clearly, you know, we don't want this in residential or any of those things. And so, and I thought, you know, it'd be interesting to see, you know, are there a lot of businesses out there that want to advertise here and use this? Is this good for Manhattan business? And I haven't gotten a lot of feedback on that. So I think we should pursue it along those lines.
Mayor, may I ask a few clarifying questions? This maybe is an unfair question to ask, but on the sign swap, is the commission more interested in addressing some non-conforming signs? I could come up in my head with probably more than a half dozen signs that are non-conforming that today they couldn't go back up, and they're either on highway, you know, on our 4-lane roadways or in our pedestrian areas. Would there be some interest in looking at, through that sign swap effort, addressing some of those? I mean, there are at least 4 off-site advertising signs in downtown, which in my professional opinion, downtown's not the most ideal spot for large billboard kind of signs. So
There's probably an appetite for that, but I think if we go there, we need to figure out how we would do it. In other words, if grandfathering is included in the ordinance, we got to figure out, in fairness, how we do that.
So my question is, and when we're talking about removal of signs, like you said, the downtown ones, what happens to them? I mean, where do they advertise then?
the existing, so the Chad Bunger taco shop that's on the existing sign now, I would presume that the sign company would then sell them advertising space on the digital sign. And it may not be,
Outside of where they're located?
maybe.
This-
I can't think of, the 4 signs I'm thinking of downtown,
These are off.
those are not
These are off premises signs.
correct, yeah.
These
So
are
they're,
not the signs on businesses.
But when you're talking about swapping, is that what you're talking about?
so the 4 signs I'm thinking of downtown, I'm not sure any of those signs are advertising for businesses within the downtown district.
Okay.
They're, you know, a taco shop on the other side of town or clothes store or whatever they are. And they're there because they either like the foot traffic or the vehicle traffic in that area, or it's a cheap sign, or I don't know why they're there. But it wouldn't be directly impacting that district because of loss of advertising for that business in that district. So my presumption is, if we wanted to address it, I think we could craft the ordinance in a way that says, you know, for every new digital or converted digital, you have to take a certain number of signs to address our goal that way. And that the presumption is those businesses that are on those signs would be able to get more messages on different locations.
I think it's very important to ask those businesses what they think about this, because I don't know the cost for them to put it on a digital sign. If they're a small business, I don't know if they can afford it or not. And one thing we want to do is make sure our small businesses have the same equity as far as advertising and not be cost prohibitive. And I want to see what that looks like. So I think they may need to be involved in this conversation if we're thinking about swapping some out and what that looks like. especially if it's not within their areas. Cost would be important for them, as well as location. And, we are looking at Thomas signs, so we have to be also very much aware of how it impacts our local businesses that also use signage for advertising. I think that's part of the conversation that maybe I'm kind of missing as well. Because we would be helping their business, but we don't want to harm somebody else's business in the same process. And I don't know how much these signs cost to advertise on digital signs.
Suzie, my understanding on that is probably the digital is going to be cheaper than somebody having to go out there and change a billboard every, 6 weeks or whatever. So I think for business, that's why I said I think this is business friendly. I'm going to be able to advertise cheaper on a digital board than I would from the research I've done. And I don't think it has any impact if we remove a few, because we're talking off-site again. It's not a sign that's on Burger King or Sonic. I think we've had problems with the Sonic one at times being too bright, as I recall. But I think it works, and I think, if there's non-conforming ones, and if we can somehow work that out so that the ones removed are the non-conforming ones on a 2-for-1 swap, fine. I think it has possibilities. You just gotta, stay a narrow focus and just on the things that were proposed. And I don't think there's any other businesses, that do the the signage in town except for Thomas right now. So I don't think there's a conflict there at all.
If you look at the couple things here then, Chad, the non-conforming signs, particularly the businessmen that are operating those, and then I think it is true that anything we do here has to impact all sign companies. So if Thomas Sign, if anybody makes a deal, let's say we say something that it's 3-to-1, then when Thomas puts up an electronic sign, they take down 3. When Company X takes down a sign, they do the same thing, because Thomas can't control somebody else's signs. And then, this is part of the dealing with the non-conforming signs. We've got to figure out who owns them, the impact, as Commissioner Reddy said, on kind of what their thoughts are about this, and then which company owns them so they can deal with it themselves.
So in town today, 99% of all signs are.
Detail, Chad.
We know that number now, that there are all but 1 or 2 signs are owned by one existing company now. So we'll try to be equitable as possible, but we already have a tilted scale now. So.
I'm so sorry, I have one more thing.
Yep.
Can you, to Commissioner Morris's point, can you also, when you come back, talk to us about enforcement?
Oh,
'Cause-
what? Yeah.
Just because if it's a problem now, it's a good thing to know.
Okay, do you have enough?
I think it is that the businesses do not police themselves, and the public has to call the code office to get enforcement. That isn't what I want to see going forward, is all.
The mechanism today for those digital signs is they were to certify that they meet our parameters, and the NITS meter that would require us to shoot at that sign and tell us how bright it is extremely expensive, and needs to be calibrated often to be accurate. But there was really no other standard to use for those digital signs when we were crafting it. Now we can go back and look at those maybe, but so we really relied on the industry to say, we promise through this certification that we set the sign up correctly.
Well, in some cases, it isn't the sign company either. It's the company that sends the technician in and every time they get a new burger, they put it on that sign that resets their brightness again. So it's not just one, there's not one answer. It's the whole, and that's all I'm interested in.
I'm very reluctant about this, but if that's what the rest of the commissioners want to see, let's have that discussion. But I feel if we can't enforce the brightness of it, and we've seen some of them really bright, that concerns me. And we have one company which is a monopoly in this industry, and I don't want us to change what we're doing to benefit one, whereas if we can't enforce, and some of our businesses might actually need the signs that they have where they are right now. And so I want to have that, make sure we're discussing all of it if we're going to have that discussion. But this is not, one, not a priority for me, and two, what we have right now really works for us, but there are still several signages that are extremely bright, and we can't even control those. So I worry about the rest of them being the same way. But we can't just trust somebody to follow what they're doing. If it benefits their business, they're gonna do it because we can't enforce it.
See, I don't agree that it's not enforceable. It can be done, by the code office and mechanisms, and even if there is a monopoly on most of the signs, that would make it easier, I think, to control it from that standpoint, because you're not dealing with a lot of people. So I think, you put the rules in place, and we've got a code office, and if there's a problem someplace where it looks like a searchlight, that can be fixed. I just don't see that as a showstopper.
I
enough?
continue to be satisfied with the way things are now. I am not interested in giving this a lot of our attention in the future. And so I know you're counting what we say, so I'm not that interested in opening this up wide.
Okay. We'll now go to item B, which is the 2018 Economic Development Report and Knowledge-Based Economic Development Report.
While Kristen gets presentation ready, throughout the course of the last year, we obviously had a lot of transition within the finance department. We took back over all the reporting being done within the economic development fund and all the companies. Kristen is pursuing her MPA. She has a lot of talents well beyond her title currently of executive secretary. So she agreed to assist with this project, and before Hillary left, she gave a very good tutorial to Kristen. So this is her first presentation, and we look forward to future ones as well. So Kristen.
Thanks for that. Evening, Mayor, Commissioners. As Jason said, I took over accountability reporting this year for economic development, and so this presentation is going to focus on calendar year 2018. Start out with the city's portion of it, and then we have representatives from KBED here as well who have a short presentation that will follow mine as after that. So just to kind of an overview of what my presentation will be tonight. A lot of this you guys have probably seen before. It's similar to previous years, but we'll do a fund history, just kind of since the inception of economic development in the city of Manhattan, our internal process review as far as like applications for businesses seeking assistance, then highlights for calendar year 2018 that'll focus on companies that are either new additions or significant updates to existing agreements. The ED fund forecast and summary, specific accountability reports to those companies that were underreporting for 2018, and then we'll focus on infrastructure spending, and then we'll follow up with questions. So, fund history. 1994 was the first half-cent sales tax. The county's portion was dedicated to roads and bridge improvements, and the city's was dedicated to economic development incentives. That was renewed then in 2012 with a focus on road and jobs, and that specific sales tax sunset in 2012 and was renewed essentially under the same setup as the 2002 one. The 2012, which is our current sales tax, sunsets in 2022. So that will be coming up for potential renewal discussion. Of that collection, the city's portion is just over 60%, so roughly $3 million of the $5 million that is generated out of that. So over the life of this current sales tax, it's estimated at $30 million. This portion will focus on, just like I said, the 2018 $3 million revenue. Process overview. A company reaches out to city administration or the chamber. If they are sent to the city first, we correlate and work with the chamber. This helps get perspectives not just from the city's side of view, but also just the businesses in the community and resources available to them. Based on those discussions, the company then determines if they want to submit an application. That data is then entered into the return on investment model. That model, I don't know how old the spreadsheet is, but it's an old Excel spreadsheet that we use. It focuses primarily on jobs and property tax to determine that return on investment. Following that, management reviews, prepares, and then any economic development agreement requires 2 city commission meetings. So the first and then second. The second meeting is the final approval. And then, as Jason mentioned, reporting is then monitored in the city manager's office now. So based on the agreement, each one kind of looks a little bit different as far as what those terms are, but based on that, we annually report.
Before you move on, can you go back to that real quick? Because I have a couple of questions. My first question is, I've had several businesses tell me that they have tried to apply for economic development fund, and essentially the chamber has told them it wasn't worth it, or they're, you're not going to get the full way through. Since we're contracting the chamber to do part of this work, if the chamber says this probably isn't a worthwhile application, can that applicant also reach out to the city administration and do it that route, or do we always start with the chamber?
I'm going to defer
I
to
can
Jason
take
on
that.
this one.
So companies have reached out in the past and started with the chamber. They may give them input and feedback based on what we've done in the past, but all our application materials, all the addendums, the entire process is on our website. It doesn't prevent anybody from submitting those, filling them out and submitting. What we try to have the chamber do is assist with filling out those applications. They're obviously then evaluated. We run them through the model. We give people feedback on what we've done with other companies, and then they typically make a decision on their own whether or not they want to pursue it, knowing they have something that's similar to what we've done in the past, or if it's very dissimilar or down a path that's requesting something that's not in concert with what we've done in the past, then sometimes they make that decision on their own.
Okay, so then my second part of that question, you kind of answered it maybe, but what specific criteria in those first 4 steps are you looking for that would prevent it from coming to the city commission?
Typically, there's a value per job. So there's an investment that is anticipated from the company, but then they're also looking to create new jobs within the community. Sizable capital investment obviously then generates property tax in the future. There's a value then we place per job on the incentive package that we put out for each of the companies in the inventory. We've done anywhere from $2,500 per job up to $7,500, almost $10,000 per job. So there's an evaluation then, and it fits within a realm of what we've done in the past.
Got it. Thank you.
It's got a, one of the things we wanted is to increase people's salaries, so it's got, that's part of the model.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail about how much they're investing, the types of jobs they're bringing, and what hourly wage they will be paying. But when we really just crystallize it up front and looking at what they're requesting versus what they'll generate, we typically provide that ratio back to them.
So a few highlights for 2018, new agreement with Ultra ICE that was approved in June of 18. As you are aware, in July of this calendar year, 2019, there was an extension approved for that specific agreement with Ultra ICE. So the first step for their agreement was to purchase and develop Lot 12 in the corporate tech park, and that time lapsed, so you could granted them an extension to the end of calendar year 2019. So that one was adopted and updated in the last year. And then for KSU Foundation, the city dispersed their $800,000 loan, so that kicked off their timeline for reporting. So they have 8 years to create 100 jobs, and that will start reporting in October of 2026. And then that, like I said, is based off of jobs and then tied to their forgivable loan. Tallgrass Brewing closed business as of August 2018. I do have a slide later that kind of goes more into detail of the specifics of them, but that is of significance for 2018. They were granted an agreement, and then, like I said, they were closed in August of 18. All other reporting companies met or exceeded their agreements, so no forgivable loan repayment was required of those reporting companies. And since the inception of the Economic Development Fund in the city of Manhattan, 1,611 jobs have been created to date. So that's a total, not just for calendar year 18.
Can I ask one question on that?
Sure.
Because a lot of people have asked me this, created that many jobs, but did we retain them? In other words, I know with some of the agreements, companies managed to hire the folks, but they're not there now. And so is there a way to add something to this report that basically says, yep, we created 2,000 jobs, but right now we only have 1,500 still in existence?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak, so I don't want to say that that's included in there, but yes, we do have
Yeah.
that information. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make note of that. So this slide is just an overview and the forecast of the fund. So as I stated in the beginning, it's estimated that the life of this sales tax will produce $30 million in revenue. There's a split of the 35% goes automatically to debt service, which is that 10.5. So annually the city makes an allocation to the debt service fund to help decrease the mill levy. And then the remaining 65% is split between jobs and infrastructure. They do an even split, which is, 19.5 million is split between the two. Traditionally, this is just how we've presented the forecast to the commission. There is nowhere that it specifies that 65 has to be split evenly between jobs and infrastructure. That's just reporting purposes, the way it's been done. So as you can see, the blue is committed funds. So in jobs, we have 1.7 committed, and infrastructure, we have 7.3 committed. And this is through the end of this sales tax, so all the way through 2022. The orange color is program administration. Those are city staff, chamber staff allocation. Those are considered committed funds as well. So that's just accountability reporting, like I said, the chamber looking into agreements, those discussions. And then the gray bar is the balance. So as you can see, we have about 6 million in jobs and 500,000 left in infrastructure. So that's just kind of a summary of that forecast. And you can see that, as I said before, you're not set to have those two jobs and infrastructure, but set as the same, split between them evenly, but that's been the history of it. All right, next slide is mill levy reduction. So 35% of the sales tax, like I said, is transferred over to reduce the mill levy. Even though it looks like we may potentially be lowering the amount, it's not. That is based off the valuation of the mill. So each year, $1,050,000 is roughly transferred over. It's roughly the same amount. That 35% is the same. It just looks different in here because the valuation of the mill each year is a different valuation. So this is just highlighting that. So specifically for 2018, it was $1,045,000 was transferred over for that 1.866 reduction.
I just want to point out, I particularly like this slide because, when we passed this thing in 2012, a lot of people were concerned, what does the Economic Development Fund do for the average citizen out there? Well, there's your answer. If you own property in town, you're getting a huge benefit out of this because otherwise, the mill would have been a little bit higher. And I think we don't publicize that as much as maybe we should. But that was one of the reasons I wanted to see that, that provision put in there when the tax was renewed.
So next we'll move into accountability reports. We'll highlight through the 3 different funds, the companies that are under agreements, anything over 100%, they are exceeding their performance requirements. And a little bit different this year, KBED produces their own annual report, and that was included with our report as an appendix. So there's not a specific slide dedicated to them. They are also here to give that presentation, as I said. So I just wanted to make note that essentially KSUIC, KBED, and Manhattan Holdings are just kind of all encompassed in that additional report. Manhattan Holdings was just included in there because they've adopted the annual salary information. So I summarized the first slide. So these are companies that were under agreements under MeadowFab. Continental Mills met their compliance reporting of 126%, so they qualified for their loan payment forgiveness. GTM met their percentage at 134, so they qualified for their tax abatement in full. KEC is, they actually don't have an accountability reporting, which is why the NA is there, and they are covered under reporting under the Chamber of Commerce, but if I'm not mistaken, it's a city-owned building, and then they do their own annual reporting, but we include them in there, in this because there was funds committed to them. And then the last one is Manhattan Holdings. So Manhattan Holdings is, there were no additional distributions in 2018, but based off the city's initial $600,000 investment, there has been a net return of the $251,866. That's on top of the invested 600, so it's that net return. Manhattan Holdings, I know, has been a little confusing because it's not typically how we handle economic development now, but my understanding is this was funding provided for early stage capital for new products and technologies, and this was the return on that investment. So like I said, there were no additional distributions in 2018 for them. So the next slide is we'll focus on the RECODE, or the 2002 to 2012. So first up is Civics Plus. They met their compliance for their loan at 109%, and they qualified for loan payment forgiveness as well as their partial tax abatement. Flint Hills Beverage qualified at 99%, and they are set up on a grant for special assessment reimbursement, so those were completely reimbursed for them. Manhattan Area Technical College came in at 95% and qualified for their loan payment forgiveness, which is tied to jobs, but as was, I think this just recently went before the commission, now they're, this is the last year of their reporting because that has been completely forgiven, so they, this will be the last year that they have to report for that. KSUIC is on there. They chose to do the lease purchase agreement, was entered in with the city in 2017 for a $5.6 million over 15 years, and then that revenue will be put back into this RECODE fund. So there will be revenues coming into that fund based on this lease purchase agreement, but they don't have any accountability or compliance reporting because that lease purchase agreement terminated the economic development agreement. And then the last one for funding from RECODE is INBAF. So the city committed $5 million of that initial, or of that money, 1.6 million remains. And I don't have in front of me what the rest of that remaining 1.6 is committed to, but I believe it is infrastructure in the North Campus corridor roads. But Jason would know specifics if you have questions on that, but that's 1.6 remains. And then for the new fund, so as I stated earlier, we have K-State Foundation. Their accountability reporting begins in 2026. That is tied to their forgivable loan. So of that, $800,500 is a loan repayment that they will make $100,000 annually, and then the remaining $300 is forgivable based on job creation. Tallgrass Brewing, they're listed on this slide because their agreement was under RECODE. The next slide will be more specific to them, but they closed business in 2018 and no longer are reporting for this. And then, as we talked about in the highlights, Ultra ICE, Their agreement is extended through the end of 2019 for that land acquisition, which would then kick off their agreement. So summary for Tallgrass, I believe this was presented in the last 2017 update for you guys because that was done in calendar year 19. So some of this might be repeat information, but just a quick summary of their original agreement. They had $250,000 for 2 loans, which were tied to land purchase and capital investment. Of that loan that they were to pay back, $150,000 remains in principal. They additionally were granted $180,000 for job creation. Of that, $112,500 remains in the fund. So that's what was not dispersed. So $150,000 left in principal and $112,500 remains in the fund left over from unallocated job grants. So of the total investment of 300, city's total investment was $317,500 of the possible $430,000 that was offered. One thing I do want to make note of is of that $150,000 remains in principal, actually 75% of that, they were automatically qualified for forgiveness based on the land acquisition and capital improvement. So really only $75,000 of it was up for repayment. So 150 is the total, but 75 is what qualified for repayment. In 2018, they did close business in August. They made their final economic development reporting for job creation. They met 81% compliance, so they had a reduced repayment amount, which the city received, as well as they did pay all taxes for calendar year, ad valorem and special assessments. So that's just kind of the update from there, and the city will write off the remaining principal of that $150,000.
Is that amount not paid out part of the $6 million?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
We have a balance of $6,500,000 or so. Is this, are these numbers already in there?
Yes, to my knowledge, yes. So the final slide is infrastructure. The main new investment for this year that is highlighted on this slide is the conference center. So the year-to-date payments is $1.7 million. The initial agreement was the $1.5 million. So the 2015 through 2017 at $500,000 annually. Each year the city commission has allocated the remaining 2018, 19, and 20 payments out of economic development funds. So in 2018, $240,000 was expensed for that debt service. Currently in 19 and 20, those two numbers there are what is forecasted to be paid. Those numbers that has not actually been expensed yet, but that is what is budgeted. And then the continuing debt service support, these are all ones that we've been including in the report for the last several years that are ongoing. The 2 business parks, the K-18 local match, handful of North Campus corridor, and then as highlighted in the report, the specific airport, military entrance and airport road. So the numbers at the bottom is just a highlight of that first bar chart of the funds expense. So committed through the end of the life of the sales tax is $7.3 million, and the remaining unallocated amount is $502,898. That's it for the city side.
Kristen, if you could go to that previous slide.
Yeah.
One thing we just wanted to point out was the continuing debt service on the conference center. When we built that at $9.5 million in total, the governing body at the time allocated $1.5 million at EcoDevo, and that was ran through the model based on the jobs and the investment that was being done at the time. Clearly in 18, 19, and now 20, we've had mill levy discussions that center around this payment. The annual debt service is around $700,000 in total, and that'll remain for 20 years. We'll end up spending over $14 million on the facility with principal and interest. It doesn't take very long for $500,000 to eat away that $6 million that's left in as balance. it won't make the full duration of the debt service. We just bring it up to give you some food for thought on how to really address this debt long-term. The existing fund, obviously at $500,000 a year, just isn't, it's not gonna make the duration. So there has to be some alternative developed, whether that's involved with the existing fund or some future fund. But just wanted to give you a pause here in terms of using that money every year for that debt service.
And now we have a commitment to build an expansion, which will increase the issue further, right?
So that item actually will be coming back before you
Sure.
November 5th. The project itself has increased. You had a previous agreement for $3.5 million. It is risen to $4.75 million. So there's an additional gap. We'll come to you on the 5th with those details. But yes, you're right, Commissioner. There's additional debt that is going to be expected if that expansion is proceeded with.
Yeah, I want to point out, I was championing making certain this was paid for out of economic development funds, and the reason is that the thing was billed as economic development, but a lot of the bond and interest money was going on property tax, and to me, that wasn't the right way to handle it. But I agree in the long run that, the money will run out. There's probably going to be a proposal to renew, the economic development fund. And, citizens need to know that if it is, it'll handle that debt, and if it won't, then it might wind up on your property tax, which is the reason, I push for it that way. I think that's important to put that in context. Different question, didn't Allegiance Airlines get some economic development money recently? And that wasn't on the chart. I know they
Would have been.
pulled up stakes and went away.
Yeah, it would have been before 12. It would have been
Okay.
part of the O2, and I think we can go, I'll dig those details out for you when,
Yeah,
but
and
yeah, they used to be part of the reporting
Yeah,
process.
I've got a list of those, and what's interesting on those slides, this shows, most of the success stories and a couple that didn't go so well, but there is quite a list of those that didn't do so well. And it'd be interesting to just add a chart to say, hey, these didn't pan out for whatever reasons. All well-intentioned, just like Tallgrass, that was a very disappointing turnaround on that. But I think it's relevant to include that, not to beat it to death, but just have a list, here's the 6 or 7 that did not go well, just so everybody knows.
There is a page dedicated to that in the full report, but it is not highlighted in this presentation, which we can definitely add. Any other
So,
questions?
yeah. Ultra Ice, tell me a little bit more about that. Are they, is it up and going? I've heard mixed stories about Ultra Ice, so I don't know.
I was like,
So
The only thing he was going to do is move his current operation out to the airport.
Right, did that happen?
That's why we did the extension a
Yeah.
few months ago. So
I thought it
don't-
was completely
there-
I don't think there's
dissolved.
any movement yet.
it's still under consideration, and in talking with Randy O'Boyle, he felt like by the end of the year, he should have enough feedback from management in Austin as to what their plans would be. One alternative is to stay where they're at. Obviously, the alternative we approved was for them to build a new facility out at the business park. So
Right,
they're
because
still
I know they were
considering
looking at
it.
options.
Yeah, they're
So I
still
wasn't sure.
considering that.
For the North Campus corridor, some of these things we will be probably looking at a little bit closer. We'll have more information, I guess, about some of the grants we've applied for and figure out how much we want to dedicate to this. And I think that probably needs to be done sooner than later, because that's a program that we have up and going, regardless of the sales tax, but just the other grants that we were talking about. I do think it's a good idea for the public to see what all the organizations, businesses that have applied and may not have been successful. That gives a complete overview of not only the successes, but here's an option, because not all businesses are going to be successful, but we are giving them a path towards success. They may not have been successful for a variety of other reasons, but at least we tried to give them a packet they can use. Is there hourly minimum wage when they apply for EcoDevo funds, $12, $11, $12?
Yeah, we're up in the mid-13s, low 14s now.
That, yeah, I wanted to be
And there's
clear.
criteria for those, and it fluctuates, so you get so much from a community fit perspective on how it's evaluated. It has to meet a certain threshold to get that community fit. It's not something that you're obligated to do or not do. You just don't score as well if you don't have those hired.
It's
Yeah, I was gonna
recommended.
say,
It's
just to
highly
clarify.
recommended.
There's no bottom.
There's no,
It just gives
Right.
you a score that
Correct.
goes into your, okay.
correct.
And, sorry, lost my train of thought. The jobs. So the new jobs, are we talking about new jobs that come into Manhattan or people that have been promoted to a different job in that same organization? When you say jobs have been created, or these, we have 1,600 new jobs, what does the word new mean?
They're affiliated with a company that we've obviously done business with. So when we track jobs and we tie those back into our agreements, they're new jobs to Manhattan.
Okay, because I think with the foundation one, we said anything outside of Kansas State University was going to be considered a new job, right?
Well, we're holding them to a standard that it's new to Manhattan.
New to Manhattan.
One good example is McCown Gordon relocated from Blue Earth Place to their facility. They'll only be able to count the new jobs McCown created after they left
Okay.
Blue Earth.
That's what I just wanted to be, so
Yeah.
they're not double counted or
Correct.
anything like that for the Manhattan.
Most of the 1,600 they could have been working elsewhere in Manhattan. The position is what counts, not where they came from.
Not the individual.
Doesn't, I just don't want it to be duplicating, like if you create one, you've lost one, if we're counting the same number
That's
twice.
why what we're doing with the foundation is different, because it's, the goal is to get new jobs that other people can occupy from outside of Manhattan.
Yeah, and I knew that with the foundation,
We tend to count the jobs company by company, but that money that we're putting into infrastructure may also generate some jobs, maybe the convention center, for example. Although some of these others, it's really hard to come up with a number of jobs that will be generated at the North Campus corridor, but because we're putting so much money into the infrastructure, I want to be sure that we're also putting money into attracting talent and jobs to our community, and not just secondarily through infrastructure. So as we go forward with our chamber initiatives, I don't know if there's something in addition to what we do with the chamber, or if we can add more oomph to it, but that's really a part of this sales tax also, is pushing on that front. So I'd like to be sure we make that happen.
I wanted to comment, this return on investment model, and we modified it a few years ago on the wage issue because, we wanted to stay away from minimum wage, but we changed this morning. And I'm just a little bit concerned that, some of the people say, hey, they don't want to apply. Is this model preventing certain things? Like, I think Manhattan Area Technical College didn't fit the model, and we sort of modified it a little bit to make that happen. And it might be time to relook that, because is there a way we can, this model's a good one for the big companies, but do we need another process where if I'm a small business and I want to come in and do X and I can justify the return, some alternate method? And I don't, just brainstorming that and just hearing what people, it's probably time for us to look at that.
Yeah.
Because we may be missing something, because, just as Commissioner McKee said, there's small businesses out here in town that, they haven't even considered, coming forth and asking for it. I talked to some folks in Aggieville about that, and they said, oh, hadn't even thought about that, thought we'd immediately be told no. And so I think that we could make some headway there perhaps.
That's a great segue into my comments, because that was literally the first thing I was going to say. The reason why I was asking some of the process questions is I think if in the future we want to follow this like traditional model of economic development, we give a business money and it creates so many jobs. That's fine if that's a strategy, but it's limiting. And both of the businesses that I spoke to that I was kind of awestruck that they were directed not to apply, and I only heard one side of the story, so there might have been more. What they were presenting wasn't necessarily what we would consider traditional economic development. They had different ideas that I found to be very interesting, but if we followed this model, there wasn't a route for them to ever get in front of the city commission. And I think we definitely miss out on opportunities in that regard. Even I shared with the commissioners a couple of weeks ago, I got to the privilege of being a judge at Startup MHK, and I thought about even there is like, how many businesses have come through this organization that we have just missed? Because there were so many great ideas that frankly, we as a city shouldn't just rely on other businesses and funding seed competitions. Like, why doesn't the city have some sort of stake in this development as well? So I definitely do think that we need to be a little bit bolder in our vision of what economic development means, and that probably means looking over this process. The only thing that I hope that future commissions don't get rid of, and something I think that we should make a little bit more strong, is I have very little sympathy to give a business money that can't pay their employees a living wage. And so what has been presented to us thus far and what I've approved in economic development as a commissioner, I have felt like the companies paid their employees reasonable wages, and especially Ultra ICE as an example had amazing benefits for even some of their lower paid $12 or $13 hours employees. But there is still a very strong and I think well-deserved underlying kind of group of citizens in the city that are concerned that since we don't have a hard rule that says if you want to create a job that pays under, let's say, $13 an hour, you cannot get city economic development money. And I don't think that that is a bad thing to codify by any means. I think that we should be looking at other models and other things that we should give economic development money for. But when it comes to us giving money to produce jobs, those jobs better pay living wages. Otherwise, what we're doing doesn't matter. The only other thing that I would say is I think the challenge, and this is kind of anecdotal because I only have 3 more months on the commission, but since our last conversation with the chamber and meetings that I've had, I think the tough thing that the chamber, city administration, and future commissions will find themselves in is I cannot really think of any large purchase or amount of money that the city has approved that we weren't told that this is vital for economic development. Almost any time we get anything pitched to us, we have to do this because it's vital for economic development. And they're just simply, we have $6 million sitting in that fund, and all of the other money that we already allocate, there just simply isn't enough money there. And so I think even when you look at the 6 big projects that we're doing, 4 of them as a commission we have been repeatedly told are absolutely vital for economic development or impact economic development. And so I think we have to be able to work together a little bit to make sure that if the commission denies something or push something back, that we look at the bigger picture. And if truly everything that we're funding is economic development, as you say, we're funding a lot more than the 1.6 million that we have already allocated out of ED, right? We've done a lot more than that in this last year if we look back at every time we've been told a project was for economic development. So I think that those things have to be balanced a little bit, and it's just something that I think everybody has to keep in mind.
Just to add a little bit here, the ED fund, we've seen what that's done over the past since 2002, actually since 1995 when it did slightly different things. I mean, a lot of that was just plain infrastructure. That was roads and bridges and so on. Now on the kind of where we are on economic development, the city has certain abilities to do things. One of the things we probably don't do well is kind of attract business other than with having our sign on. You know, and that's why we've got the Chamber of Commerce. That's the part that we fund. It's almost like a contract to go out and find business and to gin up jobs and so on. So when they came before us earlier in the month, this is how we might attack startups entrepreneurship. Maybe one of the things is take existing businesses who need to expand. You know, if you looked at Ultra Ice, for example, the acceleration that they've made, or Civics Plus, the acceleration that they've shown, or GTM, they start small, but they have some business plan that they would like to execute, and we're willing to invest in that. So all of these things, I think, that were suggested by the Chamber of Commerce through Region Reimagine and so on, as long as we can monitor that, they're measured, then, I mean, that's what I consider kind of our arm that is actually doing kind of the attraction of jobs. Because we can do the infrastructure, you know, as you say, when a lot of these things, that when we redo sewer pipes or water pipes or things like that, or redo our roads, that's all can be considered economic development infrastructure. Because, I mean, that's what enables companies to come in and sit down somewhere and go to work. The rest of it, on this jobs thing, which is really hard right now, we're just gonna have to need some help.
To your point, on our last discussion with the chamber, I thought, now that you say that, I think this is important to note, and this is kind of why I said this, was when we had our discussion about that funding, and I look forward to meeting with you to talk more about this. One of the things that I thought was really insightful in that discussion was something that Commissioner Reddy said in terms of those 6 big projects that we're advocating for the sales tax. 4 to 5 of those projects we have been told repeatedly, this is vital for economic development. We have to do these things for economic development. But if the sales tax weren't to pass in November, other than raising the mill 6, really there's only one other available fund where that money exists. And I thought that was a really insightful comment that Commissioner Reddy said, and that's the thing that stuck in my mind and why I ended up deciding the way that I did. So that's why I made that kind of last comment, is that's something that we're always going to have to balance as a community. Is I think we fall into a little bit of a trap when we say just because we don't fulfill a chamber contract doesn't mean that we're not for economic development, and that's kind of what I felt some of the pushback was at the end. I think the city has done an immense amount of investment in economic development even over the last year, and I think we've committed to do an immense amount more. But as long as we keep calling things economic development, there's going to be a struggle for that money. And so I just, I thought that it was important to note that that's why I kind of ended that statement like that, and that's actually why I ended up voting the way that I did that night.
Well, as you remember, just the levy alone is $12 million. So it's all about balance. You're going to do a presentation, Jason, or?
Yeah, those are all great comments. I'm not here to talk about that tonight. I'm here representing the Knowledge-Based Economic Development Group, which the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce is a very happy participant in, along with the City of Manhattan. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction, then turn it over to the experts in this area. So today, we'd like to remind you what this partnership is and provide brief updates on success over the last year. KBID is a unique partnership between K-State, university-related entities, and the area's leading economic development agencies. It's one of the first truly integrated university community economic development initiatives to focus on the attraction of, as well as the creation of, small knowledge-based businesses. This unique partnership has been around for over 10 years and now serves as the university's chosen local economic development venue. Over that time, this continued partnership has remained successful through many transitions in university and community leadership, a testament to its longevity. I'm going to try to figure out how to work this. We are leveraging 3 of K-State's strengths: innovation, talent, and professional development, in order to try to create economic opportunity and jobs in our community. So a bit about the membership. You see who the members are. It's the K-State Ventures, K-State Foundation, the Chamber, and then North Central Regional Planning Commission. There's also affiliate non-voting members, which City Manager Ron Fear serves as a representative of the City of Manhattan. And then we have 2 representatives from Kansas State. And then just recently, we added Potawatomi County Economic Development Corporation as well, and Jack participates actively, not only in staff meetings, but also as part of the board. So we have what we call our staff, and it's the joint effort of both the organizations. So I would throw myself in there as well, because I help work on those projects. But John from our team, as well as Stephanie and Rebecca from the KSU team. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who is going to talk more about what the ongoing activities of the organization and the successes.
You guys switch spots, you need a woman or two on that board.
Amen, Commissioner. Commissioner, mayors, thank you for letting us present to you this evening and update you on some of the activities. One of the changes that has been made in the Knowledge-Based Economic Development Partnership in the last year is actually with one of our members, KSU-IC, the Institute for Commercialization, and the K-State Research Foundation have recently merged. And so because that's always a topic of conversation on the Economic Development Report night, we wanted to share that information with you and also clarify that as you start to see the K-State Research Foundation, and maybe in the future even a different name, signifying that merged entity. We were sister organizations over the past, and since our existence in the 90s, and since the Research Foundation's existence since the 1940s. This entity, this merged entity, will serve three main functions for the university: the corporate engagement function, economically based corporate engagement, technology commercialization and IP protection, and the economic development part of our land grant mission. One of the unique facets of the Knowledge-Based Economic Development Partnership is the diversity of pipelines of opportunity that come to the organization. So we don't focus on just traditional economic development means, but really on leveraging those partner entities to bring in new opportunities that might attract and retain and grow companies in this region. So for instance, Commissioner McKee talked about Startup MHK, and actually our organization is in conversations with some of those companies about how the institution, the university, might actually be able to support their growth in the region. Again, just last week, we hosted over 125 university and industry representatives in the community for the Pet Food R&D Showcase, which is an event that we created at K-State. There were folks here from over 24 states and 7 countries. And from those types of opportunities is where we then identify new potential corporate partners for the university, but ultimately economic development opportunities. Another thing that makes us unique is the process that we take companies through. All of the partners are involved in this process, all the way from identifying and engaging those community and university assets that might help a company to locate or grow in the region, all the way through to executing whatever agreements need to be in place, and then ultimately that ongoing relationship management to make sure that they're successful here. This partnership has been and continues to be recognized nationally and internationally via awards, invited presentations, call-outs, webinars, all kinds of things. And you can see some of those organizations that have recognized us as a unique model nationally. The partnership continues to bear great results for the community. You can see here, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Commissioner Butler, these numbers are all net jobs, so when we have companies that come and then go away, we subtract them in terms of our net jobs, both in annual and in our history of existence. So over the last about 11 years, we've created over 500 jobs in the region with average salaries of over $55,000. That totals to over $28 million in annual salaries and an economic impact to date of over $48 million. In addition, capital investments of over $55 million have been made by those partner companies. Here are some of the company successes that we have seen, that we've been involved in, either their attraction or retention or growth of those companies. I might note that only a couple of these logos are companies that you have seen and given economic development incentives to. Those are for a number of reasons, some of which include our partnership is able to attract them without those. And typically we try to not leverage funds if we don't need to. We try to leverage partnerships with the university or other investments you've made, like the bandwidth that you've invested in for our partnership, or other investments, things like capacity at the chamber or the city to help those partnerships. And finally, investments in infrastructure, things like the K-State Office Park and the KEC facility that are enabling facilities that allow those companies to be here. Two highlights from the last year that I think also speak to that success and mechanisms of success. One is Topcon Agriculture. This is a Japanese company that located last November in the K-State Office Park. They initially came to K-State looking for a research partnership. When they came to visit the community, we sat them down with our knowledge-based economic development partners, the city, the chamber, the North Central Regional Planning Commission, the K-State family. And from those conversations, the priority changed from just having a research relationship to a priority being having a location here that would enable a more strategic relationship with K-State and the community. Another company's success is Dible Laboratories. That company is a microbiology testing facility that serves both the pet food and food industries. They located in the Kansas Entrepreneurial Center, and that facility was a key enabling factor for why the company decided to locate in Manhattan, was available lab space and equipment that they could get up and running relatively quickly and serve that market regionally. I'll now turn it over to Kent to close.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Commission. I'm Kent Glasscock. I'm president of the new Kansas State University Research Foundation. And Commissioner Butler, I remember a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks I was here, and you were asking about sort of, so what's my return? What's my return? Well, in 2018, the city invested $12,000 in the KBED partnership. And in 2018, figuring the $28 million of active payroll times the standard, how much of payroll a person makes is spent on sales taxable goods and services. Based on that formula, the city got a return from those net 503 jobs of $122,000. So cash on cash in the KBED partnership, you got a 10-to-1 return. This is the last slide, and you've seen it before, but I want to just kind of point it out and then I'll give you 5 takeaways. Since inception, the KBED partnership has on average created 1 new net job per week at $55,000. 1 a week, $55,000. It generates, or has generated, $55 million in capital investment. KBED, so there are 5 takeaways. One is KBED has one mission, and that is to leverage Kansas State University for regional economic development purposes. Leverage K-State for regional economic development purposes and job growth. The second thing I think to keep in mind is this partnership, as Rebecca noted, has been recognized and awarded on an international basis. Why? Because communities and universities around the country and around the world can't make these kind of partnerships work. They just can't. Probably 75% of universities barely speak to their host communities. So a partnership like this is truly unique. And we have been told that repeatedly over the course of the years. And the third component is it creates jobs. I mean, it's got one purpose: leverage K-State to create jobs, and it's being successful. Item 4, it creates jobs and it yields back to the host community a 10-to-1 cash-on-cash ROI. And finally, it works over a long period of time. As Jason noted, through multiple presidents of Kansas State University, multiple provosts, multiple city commissioners, multiple changes in city staff, chamber staff, this partnership has chugged along every year. And it is a bold partnership. It is a bold partnership because it has successfully done what other communities and universities cannot do. It works. And it is a university-community partnership that absolutely works in every stretch of the imagination and every promise and hope. We would all be happy to stand for questions if you have any, Mr. Mayor.
When we were up at the briefing at the foundation and they brought on the venture capital, is this something that the Research Foundation will be able to use as well?
Certainly, and I think in a larger sense, and I appreciated the conversation that came prior to me standing up. We have been in discussions with the chamber since Jason's arrival with regard to the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem, and capital is part of that. And this community has never really, in my view, embraced the notion of how do we help those emerging companies of promise in the ways that they need to be helped. You know, and to your point, Commissioner McKee, they don't look so hot with our current economic development model. And that's a shame. And I think this commission ought to look at that model, because nationally, the growth in jobs happens primarily in those companies that have got 1 to 5 employees. It is small business and emerging companies that grow, that fuel the economic opportunity and employment of the country. And so capital is a part of it. I think that Fulcrum will certainly play with them. But I think that we have to reach out further. And I think part of the ecosystem that we hope to assist the chamber and the community and the city with creating has to be about other capital as well, and other services that support those startup MHK opportunities and others. So I mean, you're thinking exactly right, and your questions and concerns, I think, are absolutely on point. And Jason Smith has got experience and expertise in sort of that ecosystem development, and we've not really done that here, I think, very effectively. And K-State can help. I don't think it's our proper role to lead that effort. I think it's a business community effort to lead primarily, but we can sure support.
One of the things that we've discussed before is, you know, when you look at the combination of the input from the city, which represents the taxpayers, and then the private citizens who have given, you know, that chart that, Jason, you show quite often that shows what the city gives, what, 145,000 or whatever it is, and then quite a bit more from private enterprise. But the focus of those private citizens isn't necessarily the focus that someone like Fulcrum brings. You know, in other words, when you get to a certain level of development of your company, you need the influx of capital in order to get you to the plateau of sustainment and growth. And that's why I like what the foundation has done to partner up with this venture capitalist, because just one is fine, but, you know, they also link to folks like the people that essentially focus on the Midwest or the middle part of America and not on the coast. So there's a lot of opportunity in there to get these entrepreneurial businesses started and get them to a point where they can flourish.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and sort of to that point, economic development there's still traditional economic development, but now there's such a burgeoning opportunity in really what KBED has done. And Rebecca pointed out that only a couple of those, I don't know how many, 20 companies or whatever that were up on, their icons were up, received any city support. So funding the hunt now is critically important, and it is hard work. It's hard work to find those emerging companies. It's also hard work on a global basis to engage the private sector and leverage K-State's capabilities and strengths for their end purposes, and to get them to come here and locate. So funding the hunt is I think much more critical now than it used to be, because it used to be $500,000 or a tax abatement. Well, that still works in some cases, but a lot of the opportunity is not there. Thank you so much for what you do for this community and for allowing us to speak. Any other questions? No. Okay, great. Thank you.
Kent, before you sit down, if you wouldn't mind, we've met with companies in the last couple of months, and I know Jason, Rebecca, and John have been there as well, but they've identified needs, and these are they're not very big companies. They're 4 to 8 person companies. They're looking to grow. They have expressed a need for wet labs in our community. We have labs at the KEC building, but they're occupied. There's space that is just desired, whether it's on campus or in the community, and we just simply don't provide it. The charts and the forecasts that these companies have provided us are extremely exciting to look at and think about them wanting to actually be here in Manhattan, associated with the campus and investing in our community. But we simply don't have the infrastructure available to them. They're looking for that to be provided for a period of time until they can transition into a position where they can really grow. So that's something I think we need to address as a team from an inventory standpoint, where we can possibly look at wet lab space. These folks were looking for anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. Not a tremendous amount, but the numbers of companies that are coming to us for these small pieces may fit into a broader strategy that we can come up with and help identify.
When we went up to Fort Collins, remember when we went out to the West Campus there by the CDC and looked at that center that they have with wet labs and different gradients of kind of equipment and capability, and then the integration with not only with the faculty, but the integration with the graduate students. And then obligation, written in the contract as an obligation to each one of those startups to participate with the students and the faculty. So those are the kinds of things that kind of they're expensive, but they're necessary in light of where we're going today to bring these kind of companies in or start them up.
And those are excellent points, and it impacts our strategy because we have no place to put them. Then aggressively pursuing a strategy of attracting those kinds of companies, we don't do. And the ones that just come, and are interested in Manhattan, we basically say, can you do it out of an office? Well, no. And so there is a part of opportunity that we are effectively denying ourselves. Now, how big is that opportunity? Who knows? But we're effectively denying ourselves because there's no place to put them. It is expensive, and so that is just not part of our strategy. But that's an excellent point.
Yeah, a couple of comments I was going to make on this was almost exactly what you said, Jason. When we talk about economic development, I feel like one of the things I always struggle with is governments are always going to be risk adverse with investments in using taxpayer money, right? Rightfully so. They should be. They should be cautious. And the example of Tallgrass, I can't tell you how many emails I received when Tallgrass went down. That was like, we would lose so much money to economic development. And so I think about, like, how can you support these smaller startups? Because if we invested, let's say, $10,000 into 10 of them, we'd probably fail at 7 of them, but we only need 1 or 2 really to be semi-successful. But that's still a hard narrative or a communication to tell to the public as a whole at times. And so one of the things I've thought about is how can we support things like labs and building up the ecosystem and letting an organization like yours that's particularly unique help in more of the capital investment side. The other thing that I think I wanted to point out about you all that I appreciate is the kind of jobs that and the kind of businesses that you're talking to truly are those like knowledge-based technical skill jobs. And I believe that we're in the beginning of our next industrial revolution, and I feel like we have vastly as a country underestimated the impacts that AI are going to have on our economy in the next 10 or 20 years. And the cities that are going to come out on the other side of that and be okay are ones that are investing in careers like this and opportunities and jobs like this that aren't easily replaced by artificial intelligence. So that's kind of somewhat unique to the mission that you do. Just by the virtue of you working through Kansas State, you attract those kind of positions. And so that's something I've always appreciated about the organization, because I think in the long run it will serve us really well. But yeah, I think from then the challenge of cities and states and the United States in that matter is making sure that our citizens are prepared and educated to take on those roles. And that's where our support in things like ecosystems and investments in a K-State and MATC and these kind of career transition opportunities for high schoolers and college students is really important. So yeah, I just say that I think what you do is very unique, and I appreciate all the support and all the things that you all do for the community. So thank you.
I just to come, because you raised a wonderful point. It could be, Jason, that wet lab space or lab space is like the new industrial park. If you sort of think through where the world economy is going and what Manhattan's opportunities actually are. So catalyst projects that address those infrastructure needs and funding the hunt will go a long way toward allowing us to create ecosystems and global strategies that kind of match where the global economy is going. And I think those issues are issues that you with the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce ought to have serious discussions about, and make some decisions about the formula and stuff that you use.
And one other really quick point I wanted to say was, again, particular startup MHK, is another thing that I found very striking about that event is, and there were, aside from the 2 that won, there were multiple companies, frankly, that deserved investments on some level. Some of them struck me as, yeah, this could be a very sustainable 5 to 8 person operation. But some of them, I was like, this is such a scalable, like, could potentially be a large scale business, like Kessler Drones. Like, what they are doing is so incredibly unique and amazing. But yeah, they're not quite at the place that they would fall under our current model to come and ask for support. But nonetheless, I would hate to see anything happen to a business like that could be here for a long time and really have a big scalable business, and they just need the ecosystem and support right now to figure it out before we,
I think when you sit down with Jason, you're going to find a fan for that kind of ecosystem development, and I think you'd be an outstanding partner. K-State, we will do whatever you want us to do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members.
So when's the ribbon cutting? I didn't mean, I know this.
Okay.
It keeps sliding because people can't get in the same spot at the same time.
So they're going to be like 2 things. There's going to be later this month, there's going to be just a small internal university gathering. And we're going to be unveiling a new name for Kent State University Research Foundation. Later, though, we will have sort of a celebration event, and this is what Kent State University Research Foundation and all we do and stuff, and that'll be more of a community event. So internal, and then later on, probably after the holidays. So, but yes, you'll
You've
get
been
invited.
tantalizing us.
Oh, it'll be fun. Good. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, appreciate it. All right, well, there being no further business, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.